Welcome to The Explainer. Let's get right into it, because today we're analyzing a premier policy case study that is fundamentally redefining how we view global climate democracy. We're looking directly at the 2023 to 2025 management memory of Peru's Youth Impelling Group. You'll hear us refer to it by its Spanish acronym, the GIJ.
Right. And as international climate policy analysts, we see a lot of well-intentioned youth initiatives out there that unfortunately just end up stuck on the periphery of real power. But what we are briefing you on today is entirely different. This is a highly sophisticated, diplomatically rigorous model of youth governance operating successfully right now in the Global South. It's literally a blueprint of how an entire generation transitioned from holding up cardboard signs outside the halls of power to actually holding the pen that writes the legislation.
We really have to start with the foundational philosophy that drove this entire mandate. National Representative Stephanie Aconte said it perfectly. Our representation has been marked by the conviction that there is no climate justice without social justice and intersectionality. It's an incredible hook, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And that philosophy wasn't just some diplomatic talking point. It successfully anchored the GI Jaw's entire mandate. By intentionally weaving together the perspectives of Afro-Peruvian and Amazonian women, they ensured that these policies weren't just abstract ideas. They brought the real, lived realities of historically vulnerable ecosystems and populations straight into the National Climate Change Commission. This deep intersectional approach is exactly what gives their policy demands such undeniable weight in the Global South.
Which brings us to our first core theme, the sheer power of institutional legitimacy.
The single most remarkable achievement here wasn't just the fact that they organized youth, it was how they transformed traditional grassroots activism into state-backed formal governance.
Exactly. Historically, grassroots activism has to operate on the outside, right? Applying pressure, organizing protests, but they almost always hit a glass ceiling when the actual policy drafting begins inside the room. Well, the GIJ framework completely shattered that ceiling. They secured unprecedented official access within the Ministry of Environment, which is known as MINAM, and the National Climate Change Commission, or CNCC. So this isn't about just asking to be heard anymore. It's about exercising a concrete institutional mandate from directly within the state's governance structures.
And a totally crucial point here is how this legitimacy is cemented in the official public record. The very document we're analyzing today, the GIJ's management memory, is officially published and hosted in the National Environmental Information System. That's SINIA.
Honestly, the importance of this cannot be overstated. Having a youth-led accountability document officially hosted on a government repository by the Ministry of Environment, that represents an absolute paradigm shift in climate democracy. Imagine if your local youth council had the exact same legal transparency requirements as a massive federal agency, because that's exactly what we're talking about here. It means their management is held to the exact same standard of transparency, systematization, and official public record as any other state agency.
Moving on to our second theme, let's look at the decentralized territorial dynamics. Because, let's face it, institutional legitimacy in the capital means very little if it doesn't actually reflect the whole country. This pipeline maps out exactly how they achieved true decentralized action. Step 1, the state, specifically MINAM, provided a strategic platform by formally organizing regional workshops. Step 2, the youth actively stepped up to supply vital, localized insights from the coast, the high Andes Mountains, and the deep Amazon. And finally, Step 3, those insights were formally integrated into national policy via the National Climate Change Commission. It's just an incredibly efficient feedback loop. The state provides the structural scaffolding, and the youth bring the technical, on-the-ground intelligence that the central government simply cannot access on its own.
To put some grounded context to that policy pipeline, you really have to look at the youth advocates themselves, deeply engaged in gathering territorial perspectives out in the field.
Yeah, this represents the authentic engagement we saw in the 5 macro-regional workshops known as La Siembra, which translates to the sowing. They hosted these in incredibly diverse places like Cusco, Arequipa, and La Libertad. They deliberately pulled the climate debate out of the centralized offices of Lima and placed it directly into the regions where the climate crisis is actually being felt the most acutely.
And you also had participants from the local Conference of Youth, LCOY Peru, out there capturing regional demands in Ucayali, right in the heart of the Amazon. Spot on. This strategic integration ensured that intersectional policy design wasn't just a fancy diplomatic buzzword for the GIJ. It was a lived reality, drawn directly from the people defending the environment on the absolute front lines. Whether they were addressing the highly controversial forestry law modifications or fighting extractivism, the agenda was being written by the territories themselves. So, what does this actually look like by the numbers? Let's quantify that youth climate impact.
The ideological framework is obviously incredibly strong, but the true measure of any institutional model lies in its operational scale. Over 4,000. Just let that sink in for a second. Under this institutional umbrella, the GIJ formally trained and mobilized over 4,000 youth advocates. We are talking about extensive capacity building, massive climate literacy efforts, and totally democratizing access to complex technical environmental legislation.
And that mobilization wasn't just in one pocket of the country. They successfully reached 25 distinct regions through the GIJ's decentralized dynamic. From the coastal deserts all the way to the highland communities, their operational footprint literally covered the entirety of the nation's political map.
But this number, 11, is perhaps the ultimate indicator of political integration. The youth maintained an uninterrupted official presence across 11 sessions of the National Climate Change Commission. Think about that. They weren't just invited for a quick photo op at a one-off summit, they were a permanent driving fixture in the state's highest climate policy body.
Of course, none of this happens by accident, which brings us to strategic leadership and coordination.
Achieving metrics like that requires world-class diplomatic tact and pretty intense operational leadership to navigate the complex bureaucracy of a national ministry.
For sure. And we really must respectfully profile the national representation of this period. It was co-led by Stephanie Aconte, whose incredibly powerful words we opened with, and Astrid Chavez, who we see operating on the global stage.
Right, Astrid Chavez, alongside Stephanie and an entire team of national focal points, really set the stage for an intense level of operational mechanics behind the scenes. Because, it's one thing to finally get a seat at the table. It's a completely different thing to know exactly how to leverage it to push forward a national climate agenda.
And the specific operational mechanics they ran behind closed doors are just fascinating to break down.
I want to specifically emphasize Astrid Chavez's instrumental role here. She was absolutely critical in driving these operational mechanics, leading the core, day-to-day coordination with the Ministry of Environment. Furthermore, spearheading the final systematization of these management memories, which involves compiling the data, ensuring horizontal accountability, and democratizing the technical data, requires immense intellectual rigor. This level of leadership is what ensured the GIJ was viewed not just as a youth activist group, but as an indispensable technical partner to the state itself.
All of this culminates in what we're calling a blueprint for the Global South.
What Peru has built here isn't just an isolated domestic success story. They are actively exporting this framework globally. The GIJ model serves as a highly scalable, robust blueprint for the entirety of the Global South. It basically proves that institutionalizing youth climate action accelerates national environmental goals. Just look at these global initiatives. They launched the Perugia Joven Rumbo a la COP30 delegation, and they've maintained a high-level presence at COP28, COP29, and the Biodiversity COP16.
And they are backing up that global presence with some seriously incredible innovation. They actually built the COP and Community digital platform through an alliance with the Development Bank of Latin America, the CAF, to democratize climate education across the entire continent. They even developed the first AI assistant for youth advocacy. They are literally transforming technical cooperation into a permanent digital tool for capacity building, elevating local, territorial demands straight into the highest international negotiations using cutting-edge tech.
Which leads us to our final, and frankly, pretty provocative thought to close out this explainer. If a nation in the Global South, like Peru, with all of its complex geographic and political realities, can successfully institutionalize youth climate leadership to this profound degree, what exactly is holding back the rest of the Global North? It's the million-dollar question every international policy community needs to be asking itself right now. The GIJ has undeniably provided the blueprint. The unmatched value of this model is clear, the data is officially systematized, and the youth are more than ready. The ball is now firmly in the court of global governance to catch up. Thank you so much for joining us for this crucial briefing.